Let me start by saying that I am pretty set in my ways with what I like, but that doesn't make me right, because it's all a matter of opinion. Personally, when I see modern architecture, to be honest, although it once made my heart sink, nowadays it just makes me feel nothing. Modern architecture and interiors seem to me to be a little soulless, void of personality and character, and they say very little about the time that we're currently living through. Whereas if we look at period architecture, Victorian homes, Gothic cathedrals, Art Deco theatres, they speak about the time, unashamedly, with ornate mouldings and spindled staircases that creak with 100 years of story. Yes, as you can tell, this is the kind of stuff that gets me going. For most of human history, architecture told stories. Even modest homes were built to last and designed with care. Beauty wasn't seen as frivolous, it was a part of life. I mean, can you imagine what it's going to be like when future generations look back on the architecture that's being built now? What story will it tell? Because today, most new homes look like they were designed by an AI, with clean lines and flat edges and especially grey. They are muted. And there's actually a reason for this, but we'll get to that later. But all in all, houses today, and I'm deliberately calling them houses and not homes, and the current state of the housing market means that they're all being designed and decorated with one thing in mind: resale value. And that is what scares me most. I acknowledge that there is a big housing crisis, and although seeing a flurry of new builds on what used to be a patch of green can sometimes give me a pang of disappointment, I understand that it's probably necessary. But what I don't believe is necessary, and what I will never think is necessary, is taking a house that has already been stood there for the last 100 years or more and stripping it of every inch of its history. It genuinely breaks my heart. And let's just look at the facts. Once these original period homes are gone, they're gone. We can't get them back. And that is what scares me the most. Because selfishly, I want to live in an untouched 1920s farmhouse or perhaps small manor house one day that I can lovingly restore and allow all of its features to be celebrated, quirks and all, even if those features aren't efficient or practical. Because, I'm going to share a secret with you, I don't really care if my home is practical or efficient. Honestly, I care more about the story behind them, the legacy of them standing the test of time, and the tapestry that it paints of the human experience. Plus, the time that I get to spend in a home like that, and all the things that I get to do, and most importantly, the way that it will make me feel. Because the thing is, this isn't just about aesthetics. This is about erasure. And I genuinely panic that by the time Jack and I have got our affairs in order, there'll be none of these houses left. Or put better by this short video,
If you want a modern house, buy a modern house! Stop ruining all the pretty ones! I want to live somewhere cool someday!
So I thought that what might quell my anxiety is understanding how we got here in the first place, and if there's a chance that it will ever stop. For centuries, architecture has always been a statement of identity, aspiration, and culture. In the ancient world, we had power carved into stone. The Greeks gave us proportion and symmetry. The Parthenon's geometry wasn't just beautiful, it was philosophical. And then the Romans added arches and domes and infrastructure. And beauty and utility were never seen as separate. Now, this is interesting to me because, in my opinion, what these buildings and statues reflect is more akin to that monochromatic elegance that we're seeing in homes and products and fashion. And recently, I actually did a video called Why Everything is So Boring Now, where I talked about the decline of colour in order to sell products, the rise of blanding, and the greige aesthetic, which is basically grey and beige. So are we just re-embracing the beauty and sophistication that we saw in ancient times? Oh my gosh, my voice, I just did a Ross Geller.
So,
Excuse me. Well, not entirely. Because if we look at the statues, researchers found that although typically seen as a beautiful expanse of marble, these were originally polychromatic. i.e. they were painted with lots of vibrant colours. And I found this so very fascinating. So a big thank you to YouTuber Mina Lee, who discussed this topic on a video she did a couple of years ago. Loving your channel, by the way, Mina. So the reason the paint is no longer present on these classical sculptures is partly because it wore off with time, but also because archaeologists and museum curators would remove the paint for preservation purposes. But the removal of colour for preservation purposes on these ancient statues was a practice that originated in the Renaissance. Anyway, now we're fast forwarding to the Gothic era, with its towering spires that pierce the sky and jaw-dropping stained glass windows. These buildings weren't just homes or churches. They were experiences that evolved from the Romanesque style, with its rounded arches and simpler designs to convey a sense of permanence and power. Heading over to the Renaissance, classical ideals returned. Architects like Palladio fused math with artistry. Buildings were designed with a reverence for proportion, detail, and harmony. Even the everyday had dignity. Then we saw the 18th and 19th centuries with rapid urbanization, but this didn't kill beauty. It diversified it. In England and Europe, you had Victorian, Georgian, Beaux Arts and Art Nouveau, and in America, Craftsman, Queen Anne and colonial revival styles were born. What all these styles had in common was an obsession for detail. Whether you were rich or poor, buildings were often just more personal and often handcrafted, everything layered with texture and intention. I mean, even things like train stations and department stores seem to be built to inspire. But this obsession with beauty came at a cost. Time, money, and labour. And then everything changed. Boom! We're in the early 20th century, and what does that bring with it? War, industrialisation, and a new ideology, modernism. Woohoo! Born out of tragedy and technological optimism, modernism said, "Forget the past, the future is machine-made." Well, they weren't wrong. Architectural designers began to reject ornamentation as dishonest, seeing buildings as machines for living in, and so homes became more like boxes: glass, steel, concrete, straight lines. There was no fluff. And again, this wasn't just about aesthetics, it was philosophical, with modernism aiming to wipe the slate clean in favour of rationality and efficiency. But in doing that, everything started to feel a tad colder. And then we had the absolute housing boom of the 40s and 50s, which is crucial to understanding how we got to today's cookie-cutter neighbourhoods and architecture that feels like it has a bit less personality. Yes, would you believe that my favourite period of history is what started the downfall for architecture as we know it today? And yes, I am absolutely heartbroken by that fact. This period marked the beginning of mass-produced, standardised housing in the West, especially in the United States, and it deeply influenced the way homes look, feel and function today. Don't get me wrong, I adore me some mid-century modern design and architecture, but we can't deny that compared to the way things have been done in the past, this was now lighter and sleeker, but also warmer, but more minimalist and industrial. I mean, if we compare a mid-century living room to a Victorian parlour room, you can see the difference. So, let's talk about that baby boom. After World War II ended in 1945, millions of soldiers returned home, and of course they wanted to start families, which kicked off the baby boom. But there was a major issue. The US and many other nations faced a severe housing shortage. Most existing homes were old, often built in the 19th or early 20th century, and there simply wasn't enough housing for the millions of new families being created almost overnight. Enter developer William Levitt, who saw this as a massive opportunity. In 1947, Levitt and Sons began building Levittown on Long Island, New York, and it became one of the first true suburbs and the model for thousands of suburban communities to follow. Levittown used assembly line construction, so instead of having one team build a house from start to finish, each crew specialised in one task, just like in a factory. Standardised materials, all homes use the same parts, appliances and layouts. No basements or attics. To cut costs. No ornamentation. Decorative features were too time-consuming and expensive. Identical or near-identical floor plans. Repetition sped up building and lowered material costs. Levittown could build 30 houses in a single day. And it reminds me very much of the new builds, they're called new builds, that we get here in the UK. I'm not sure if it's the same in America, but I'm pretty sure they will follow a similar formula. It kind of gives to me sort of Stepford Wives suburbia where every house looks pretty much identical. And I don't love it. These homes were often small, around 750 to 1200 square feet, and boxy. They looked neat, clean, and pretty much devoid of character. Apparently, early homes did have some charm with Cape Cod-style facades, pastel colours, but they became blander over time.
The parts of the house are stamped out like airplane or automobile parts. Houses such as these were assembly line made, proving the theory of many a planner that the assembly line principle, which results in low cost and great quantity in everything from toothbrushes to Liberty ships, can be applied to the building trades. Prefabricated houses are one way to low-cost living on a high-standard level.
This model became the blueprint for suburban America and many similar developments in the UK, Canada, and Australia. But the UK had a very distinct but parallel journey when it comes to housing development post-World War II. And although American suburbia does get a lot of attention, the architectural shift in the UK was just as profound. Believe me. During World War II, over 2 million homes were damaged or destroyed in the Blitz. London, Liverpool, Coventry, and many industrial towns suffered devastating bombing. After the war, there was a desperate need for fast, affordable housing. And like in the US, Britain faced a housing crisis, but with far older housing stock and war damage to boot. The response? Prefabs and council estates. The government introduced temporary prefabricated homes under the Housing Act 1944. These prefabs were assembled quickly from factory-built parts, designed to last 10 to 15 years, but many lasted over 50, small, practical, but lacked charm or detail. Over 150,000 prefabs were built, and you still see them all across the UK. The thing is, these houses were lifesavers, and they were housing millions of people that were trying to recover from living during a war-torn period. They were very necessary, and I'm glad that they were built. But we can't deny that this is what began the shift toward functionality and efficiency and space saving, kind of feeling like we're all boxed in like sardines, and plain housing that we're still seeing come up in new designs today.
Houses and quickly. That's the answer 9 out of 10 people all over Britain give when asked what's number one on the country's priority list of wants. Prefabrication, now one of the most overworked words in the language, has been welcomed, not because factory-made houses are ideal or even permanent, but because they are at least houses.
I think it is very good indeed for a small house for the men who are coming home and the women who have been working hard in the factories and want to get back to family life. I think it is an ideal house. Of course it is small, but the planning is good, and the house could easily be worked and would be most economical to run. I consider the kitchen, with a built-in refrigerator and such other useful equipments, a great advance in a working man's home and a step in the right direction.
And now, we're in the 50s. The government began building massive housing estates for working class families. And at first, these were low-rise garden estates influenced by the Garden City movement with green space, modest decoration, and a bit of charm. But very quickly, speed and cost efficiency took over. By the late 50s and into the 60s, councils began building high-rise tower blocks and monolithic concrete estates, which apparently are called brutalist designs, and they're influenced by architects like Le Corbusier? Bussier? And I see a lot of these in Britain. Okay, these big concrete estates, these high-rise tower blocks, they're literally everywhere. And what I found very interesting was allegedly when they were first built, they were meant to symbolise modernity, equality, and progress. But when you walk around these areas in Britain, they often symbolize deprivation, neglect, and in some cases poverty. So it's just funny to know how the dream began versus what it is today. So what did we lose during this transition? Well, for one, we lost handcrafted design. We lost fireplaces and coving and sash windows and personality. We also lost our streets looking visually rich. Yes, the streets were still very much dense. You still had loads of terrace houses right next to each other with the little gardens at the back. But because the architecture was now changing, this was no longer visually stimulating because there was less to look at. And we lost the fact that homes used to be built with local materials and have regional character. You know, cookie cutter. What did we get? Function became king, ornament became luxury, mass production removed personality from homes, concrete replaced brick, and communal spirit was replaced by isolated units. I mean, look at Japan. They're just building upward at this point. So this I find interesting. Now we're in the 60s, kind of 60s to the 80s, and obviously we have a growth of private suburban developments, but they would do this thing which I've called in the past gentrified, I couldn't even remember it then, gentrified authenticity, but you could also say mock charm. It's a trend that actually went on up to the 80s and I'd say even the early 90s. So in these suburban homes, mock charm became its own aesthetic. People would install like a fake beam or mock Tudor touches and chunky brick fireplaces and basically anything you could expect to see in the home of Hyacinth Bouquet. Basically, cosmetic nods to history, but with no real craftsmanship. Just your standard Airbnb today, you know? But you know what? I'm not mad at this. And I know I've already said in past videos that I don't always love gentrified authenticity. This kind of led into postmodernism in the late 20th century, so like the 70s, the 80s and 90s, where people were starting to bring back some flair and some whimsy with, you know, arches and that weird trend where there was loads of gold moons and stars and suns, you know, that kind of witchy aesthetic. But it didn't really ever catch on with the masses, like the general public, because I think it was seen as kind of kitschy and ironic and not entirely sincere. But I do not agree with that because I am the definition of kitsch. I love me a bit of kitsch. You know, stuff shaped like food. I mean, how much kitschier can you get? But will I buy it every time I see it? Yes. But then came the 2000s, and with it a wave of bland minimalism once again. Suddenly, everybody wanted granite countertops and an open floor plan. And by the 2010s, everything was grey. And thus we had the rise of millennial grey, an interior design trend so dominant it almost feels to me like a big cultural brain fog, a big grey fog. The grayscale aesthetic represented neutrality, modernity, and maturity. Grey laminate floors, grey walls, grey countertops. And like I said, just because a little bit more colour is my personal preference, it doesn't mean I'm right. And I don't hate grey. I mean, that wallpaper behind me, that's grey. Oh my gosh, never noticed that before. That is a black and grey wallpaper, but obviously it's got a bit more of an interesting design. I don't hate grey, but what I did, is hate a strong word? No hate, is when I saw people on Instagram and Pinterest and TikTok moving into older homes and gutting them. They were tearing out everything that made those historic homes historic and gave them a unique character. And, well, I just revert back to my last point.
If you want a modern house, buy a modern house!
As Kyle Nutt perfectly encapsulates in his short viral film. This is how homes have changed. And honestly, he's right. And this muted homogenization, personality paved over for parking, it became really trendy. And not just with influencers, but with celebrities who were championing homes that were just seas of beige with very few personal items on display. Of course, not every celebrity followed that trend. Those with the same appreciation for vintage as you and I, like Dita Von Teese, rejected that Kim K calmness for eccentricity and storytelling, filling her home with items that were organically found, not perfectly designed. Wow, she is the queen of cluttercore. See, I even think that might be a bit too much for even me. I do like my home to have a sense of harmony, and that's why I say I don't hate grey, I don't hate beige, and I'm not here to judge how anybody designs their home, really. I'm just speaking about my own opinion if anybody wants to listen. But there can be a sense of harmony and peace that comes with not going too wild with colour and ornate design and detail. Detail's great, but if everything was intricately detailed, you'd have like a constant headache trying to work everything out. Sometimes simplicity is a good thing. I can't believe I'm saying that. But the pendulum has swung too far the other way, and if we're not careful, we won't have any details to even choose from. My worry is that history itself is getting bulldozed. Not by actual bulldozers. Bulldozers? Is that how you say that? But by taste. It just feels like to me that design used to be emotional and very human. And now, not just with homes, but with pretty much everything, it feels transactional. Like designers are designing for profit margins rather than magic. But there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and it's you. Because I strongly believe that the tides are starting to turn, with people yearning for a sense of expression and a nostalgia within their space of what makes them them. And I do believe that property developers are catching on. I know I already mentioned gentrified authenticity or mock charm, but we are seeing that pop up in Airbnbs a lot more because they've caught on that that's what people like. Or at least if there is already charm to be showcased, then they are showcasing it if the property itself is slightly older. And also we're seeing a lot of period loveliness being celebrated in popular interior design shows.
I feel like I've asked an AI to show me a cottage so cute it'd make me cry.
I think it's called Nanacore.
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 Hardcore Nana.
And sometimes winning them. And I also understand that property developers and landlords simply have a job to do because people need homes that they can just move into and not lovingly restore. I just wish that we wouldn't touch the ones that are already old, but I don't know. Maybe we're running out of space to make new ones, so we have to destroy the old ones. I don't know. I just hope it's not too late. And so, to my community, I implore you to keep preserving, keep restoring, keep celebrating, choose colour and soul and places that feel like somewhere. And who knows, perhaps if enough people show their passion for the preservation of original features that tell a collective story, then by the time Jack and I are on the property ladder together, there might still be some left.